So Justin and Jordan, if you want, we can wait a few more minutes for folks to join and maybe get started in a couple minutes.
I think that makes sense. I think, dinner time, end of the work shift. I think if we gave it to, let's see if we get a spike in the next like 3 minutes. Let's see what that looks like. And we can kick it off at, I would say, 6:33.
Okay, that sounds good. All right, it looks like we have 13 attendees right now. So panelists, if you want to get started, we can probably do that.
That sounds good to me, Aaron. We'll go ahead then and we'll kick it off. And we are recording. This will be circulated afterward along with the slides. So anybody who doesn't catch the beginning will get a chance to see it later online at ferndalemoves.com. So without further ado, I'm Jordan Twardy. I'm the Community and Economic Development Director here for the City of Ferndale. And I'm just going to kick us off with a little bit of housekeeping. Aaron, if you go to the next slide, please. So this is our agenda for tonight. And if you've come to any of our previous meetings on this topic, it'll look a little familiar to you. We're going to start formally with an introduction by Mayor Piana, who's just going to frame the issue, kind of talk about why we're here, what is Woodward Moves, et cetera. And then you're going to get a presentation from CED staff, and that's going to talk about Woodward now and future. So it's going to kind of talk about the meat and potatoes, the crux, if you will, of what is on the table, what's being talked about for Woodward, what the options are, and the stats and the data behind that. And then we're going to have the majority of the meeting go to Q&A, 30 minutes of that. And we're going to, just like a council meeting would be, we're going to have an opportunity for you to speak up, share your thoughts, ask questions. And our subject matter experts, Justin Lyons and Aaron Patel, will be taking those questions. And then we'll wrap up with about 5 minutes left. We'll talk about what comes next and how you can stay engaged. And with that, a little bit of housekeeping. So something we've added, if you've ever used this before, Mentimeter, you can go on your phone or your computer to menti.com, menti.com, right there in that yellow orangish box. And if you use that code, we're going to be putting up some interactive polling throughout the presentation. We'll ask some questions. You'll have a chance to answer. And if Murphy's Law doesn't snake bite us tonight, you'll see the answers populate on the slides. But take a look at that, and you can use that to kind of go along with us and answer questions as we throw those in the presentation. Please use the chat feature to send any questions throughout the presentation. And if you could, please remain muted while the presentation is going on until you're recognized. We're going to record and post the meeting and add and answer any questions. So if we can't get to it tonight for some reason, any information we have to go dig up to answer a question, we'll post those answers online at ferndalemoves.com with all the other materials on this project. So that's our housekeeping. And with that, I'm going to kick it to our mayor, Melanie Piana, to formally kick us off. And thank you everyone for being here.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for joining our Woodward Moves, the community meeting tonight. We've had many of these community meetings, particularly with our business owners, and I'm just glad that you're here to give your input. And I know some of you have been our repeats or joining again, and I really appreciate your ongoing participation. Why are we here? So the Ferndale section of Woodward and Pleasant Ridge from 8 Mile to 696 needs repair, and NDOT owns and manages Woodward, and they have planned to repave the section in 2022. So we are working with NDOT to make sure that we get the most benefit out of their scheduled construction process. So we are here today to tell you about the work that has gone into the researching new ideas, how to slow traffic, increase safety, and make walking and biking more enjoyable, and really increase safety for drivers, because we've heard a lot of issues for drivers seeing people walking or biking as they come up one side of Woodward. And, they look one way for the oncoming traffic, but pedestrians are coming the other way. So we're really here about how do we, and make some improvements to Woodward as part of leveraging this opportunity that NDOT is going to be doing along the corridor. And as you all know, I think you all know, Ferndale is the only community on the Woodward corridor where we are cut in half by 8 lanes of the NDOT highway. And I really just look forward to hearing your comments and ideas. And our staff are going to be walking through some concepts about what we think can work. And as part of this process going forward after tonight's presentation, staff is really going to be looking at what are the options, and then working with some engineering design about what is the cost of those options to implement, and then can we afford them, and what can we do by and have ready to go by August, so that all of our documentation is in with NDOT so that they can take that and go out to bid. So that's really why we're here, trying to leverage an opportunity, solve some challenges the community has been complaining about for 20 years with the safety of Woodward, and leveraging an opportunity. And the way that I talk about it really is, it's my space concept that, a space shuttle coming in back into the atmosphere. I call it the NASA window, right? We've heard it called the NASA window, and that the space shuttle has to hit it at a precise time so that they can successfully come back to Earth. And if they can't make that window, they go back to orbit, and they go back to orbit until they can figure it out again. And that's kind of where I feel we are with MDOT, that they're going to repave. It's our chance to, hit this window, working with our communities about what could we include in this process. And if we don't do it, then I feel like as an elected official, I'm ignoring 20 years of complaints from residents and not taking advantage of this opportunity. So I'm just going to pass this all over to Justin and Aaron, who will walk you through everything. And I look forward to your comments. And if you wanted to talk to me further after this meeting, please feel free to reach out to me and we can have a more direct conversation. So with that, Justin and Aaron, take it away.
Thank you, Mayor. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay, but I'm Justin Lyons, Planning Manager for the City of Ferndale. We won't go through a bunch of introductions, but this is generally the team that is, from the city side, DDA side, and chamber side, have been working on this project in its most recent iteration. I'm not sure if there's any business owners that are on the call, but again, Lena Stevens from the DDA and Joy Wells from the Ferndale Chamber of Commerce. They've also been working on this project. So if there's specific business questions that you would like to ask them after the meeting, that would be totally fine if it's something that, Aaron, Jordan, or I couldn't answer. So, but thank you for joining us. So I think the mayor kicked it off nicely in talking about history. There's been a lot of history, and Woodward has came a long way since 1909. And this is just an image that our staff found from being the first mile of a long stretch of highway in the nation to get paved. So pretty cool that Woodward is in the history books on that. And so since that time, Woodward has primarily prioritized vehicles since that time. So, today's meeting and the previous Ferndale Moves meeting have been really about, what's next for Woodward from a mobility, safety, economic development, and climate perspective, a wider perspective. So how can we keep those goals in mind as we plan for the future? As the mayor said, you're here to give us community feedback. We've heard a lot of feedback over the years, but we want to hear more. And so, what is your feedback related to access and safety and the future of mobility for Woodward? We know that a construction project is happening by the Michigan Department of Transportation, the state's transportation department. We know that that's happening in 2022, regardless of, what the design is that we all have various opinions about, but how can we make it better that works for everyone while we can leverage this opportunity? So hopefully this works for us. This is an image of above Pleasant Ridge and Ferndale, the border on Woodward. And so we thought it might be fun to have people guess how much space is actually dedicated to people on Woodward today. So in that term, we mean sidewalks. And so if you want to guess, we're using menti.com. You can pull up on your phone or in your browser and type in that code, and it should bring up this question. So we'd like people to guess the space dedicated to people on Woodward. A, 6%, B, 25%, C, 67%, and D, 78%.
So Justin, if you progress to the next slide, we might be lucky and it might be able to populate.
Okay. So again, here's the 4 options. If you pull up menti.com and use the code 83230, which I believe is also in the chat, go ahead and plug in your guesses.
So you might be able to refresh it and see if it works. But so far we have 8 folks who have said 6% and 1 that says 25.
All right. So
That's too
Erin,
bad.
you may just have to be our reader of guesses, but.
Okay. So far we have 9 at 6% and 2 at 25%.
All right, so we'll just give it one last moment for any final guesses, and then we'll move on.
All right, still 9 at 6 and 2 at 25.
All right. So we'll move on to the next page, but this is just a approximate cross section generally of Woodward, but so the folks that guess 6%, that is correct for this particular cross section. So 6% is not a whole lot of space when you consider that entire 200 feet of right of way. So that can lead to some safety issues, noise, tight areas for people, in between visibility issues, and pedestrian and bike collisions that have happened in the past. So that really tight right of way can also include some varied uneven pavement, some obstacles that make the sidewalk challenging for anyone to really navigate. The wide roadway with the multiple lanes, 4 lanes in each direction, encourages unsafe speeds. And so there can be some challenging merging areas for turning drivers, can be an intimidating barrier in general to just cross the 2 sides of Woodward. So that narrow separation between the sidewalk and traffic can make that a pretty loud environment, less pleasant for people that are on the sidewalk cafes or walking to businesses. So, and I think, there are some people that do bike in the street. I'd say those are probably your more confident, experienced bicycle riders that feel comfortable doing that, but that really shifts a lot of people riding bikes to the sidewalk. So just to set the stage. So what we do know today at this point is, as I said, MDOT will be resurfacing Woodward next year, likely between the April and November 2022 timeframe. This is a maintenance project for them. So the state will fund and manage basic work like standard asphalt milling, a couple of inches of the existing asphalt being milled down, and then some ADA crosswalk improvements, which are required and will be a benefit to everyone. At that same time, Ferndale and Pleasant Ridge have been working through some traffic and planning studies to try and make a safer Woodward. So we'll get into that a little bit more. And we do know that anything that the cities would want additionally as part of this project would be city funded. So MDOT has also reiterated that in 10 to 15 years, they would potentially do a full reconstruction of Woodward. That's sort of a longer term opportunity. We'll talk about that. And the positives and negatives with that. So I won't go through all of these slides, and I think some of the people on the call are used or have seen this already, but past 20 years, there's been a lot of conversations about Woodward and hearing those different, seeing those different versions of Woodward as well. And we'll show you some other historical pictures coming up. But the Regional Transit Authority worked with Woodward Avenue communities all the way from Detroit to Pontiac in 2014 and 2016. Woodward was a big part of that, and a lot of that was focused on transit and a transit millage, which unfortunately did not pass, but was pretty well supported in Ferndale. And that led into the Ferndale Master Plan, where there was a lot of specific action items related to Woodward as well, which led us to this most recent 2 studies where Ferndale and Pleasant Ridge received grants from SEMCOG for a bicycling and walking safety audit. So as part of that project, staff and residents and business owners responded to a community survey and actually did a walking audit and experienced Woodward on a pretty rainy day in April during rush hour. Got to experience, I think the full force of Woodward at that time and that during that month. And so that led into a final recommendation and audit plan that was adopted by City Council in August of that year. And then right after that, MDOT had decided after many delays that they were considering resurfacing, repaving Woodward. That didn't give a whole lot of time to really collaborate between the communities and the state agency. I-75 was going on at the same time, the DOT construction, some other local roads and other projects. And in the end, MDOT did delay that project. And so now it appears that 2022 is when that will be happening. So that gave Pleasant Ridge and Ferndale time to further evaluate the road diet. We called it the road diet feasibility study, and also the city of Ferndale is updating the mobility plan right now. So that continued with MDOT's resurfacing. And so over the past few months, we've been doing some engagement and really working towards a grant application that will happen at the end of the February in front of City Council. And so, if that were to move forward, we'd be talking about construction documents, more design work, and then eventually the resurfacing in 2022. So we'll get into more details on that ahead. So speaking a little bit more to those studies, I'm sort of condensing hundreds of pages of data into one slide. So there is more information available at ferndalemoves.com. And generally that first safety study in 2019 found over 800 crashes from 2016 to 2018. A lot of those crashes did happen at major intersections like Camborne and 9 Mile, and places where you would expect where there's more activity. Throughout that study and the survey, and then also just being on Woodward, it was cited that there was long wait times for pedestrians to cross Woodward. There's not very many crosswalks between each other, so they're greater than 300 feet, which is sort of a standard that communities try and stick to have more crosswalks like that. So if you think about between Camborne and say Pleasant Ridge at Sylvan, that's a long way for someone to cross on foot. So general lack of comfort walking and biking. The more recent road diet feasibility study analyzed how traffic would be affected by removing a northbound and southbound lane on Woodward Avenue, which was the recommendation in that safety audit. The study's parameters were set up with MDOT's engineering team, and a key element of that study was a term that's in traffic engineering. It's called level of service. Essentially, level of service is an A to F grading scale that measures vehicle delay, and MDOT's criteria generally hopes for a level of service or C or better. So the study found that with the proposed reduction of one travel lane on each side of Woodward, the level of service would generally meet the C or better standard at the majority of intersections. There's a few intersections where MDOT had, upon receiving this study, said that they would work with the city and expects that there are some adjustments they can make to make those intersections meet that standard as well. The study included some bicycling and pedestrian improvements that we'll show shortly, and that generally parking would remain in that scenario. So it showed that removing those travel lanes would be feasible and could potentially make the sort of short-term improvements that were referenced in that previous plan. So we do have another question we'd like to pose to the group. How much of Woodward's vehicle capacity is used today? So the current design is meant for 100,000 vehicles daily. So what is that percentage that folks think is being used right now? A, 12%, B, 27%, C, 42%, or D, 83%.
It's working.
All right. Well, if only one works, that's okay. So we'll just give folks a couple of minutes to put in their guesses.
It looks like there might be a little bit of a lag, but the majority of folks so far have put in for 47%, or sorry, excuse me, 42%, one for 83, and one for 27.
Okay.
So the majority is looking at 42% right now.
All right. Well, we'll keep rolling so we can get to that Q&A. So folks that voted 42%, that was correct. So, the capacity of Woodward generally, I think I made the comparison at a previous meeting of, oftentimes when malls were built, they had built enough parking for Black Friday for that holiday season. It sort of feels like Woodward was kind of built in that fashion. If you look at any of the projections from SEMCOG for population growth and things like that, Woodward would not come near that 100,000 vehicles estimate. So the 8 lanes that Woodward feels, it may feel like a highway and loud when you're right next to it on walking or on the sidewalk cafe. It is very similar to a small highway. So one last question. So this is a 1949 photo of Woodward Avenue. And so, what does the future of Woodward look like? What we've heard over the years, a number of different things, and through those most recent studies, we've heard some answers. But 1 to 2 words, if you want, share, what you think the future would look like for Woodward Avenue.
So far, we have sustainable, pedestrian friendly, attractive, busy. Safer, lively.
So for folks that maybe are watching or will watch this afterward, we'll make sure to put those slides up that show everyone's words. So thanks for contributing, even if you can't see it on my screen. Apologize for that.
Justin, I can share my screen really quick and then we can see
Sure.
it real time if you would like.
Yep.
All right, so that's what we have so far. 25-mile-per-hour speed limit, sidewalk cafes, attractive, dedicated bike lanes, sustainable, looks like a lot of people focused on that, green and eco-friendly, accessible, happy people, beautiful, human scale.
Speed limit, I would support that as well.
All right, I'll
Great.
stop sharing and turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. So we've kind of been alluding to this short-term versus long-term, and I think the mayor's moonshot type of comparison is pretty apt. So due to the timeline, budget, and scope of MDOT's repaving project, we know there's certain things we can address on Woodward now. This allows us to test some items now and determine how the corridor could evolve or should evolve when the time comes for MDOT to reconstruct Woodward, if that's 10 to 15 years from now, beyond. And so the short-term items, these are just examples of what we've looked at that were based on the safety audit. But so short-term as in, next year, based on all the data that we have, we know that reduction of a travel lane on both sides, north and south, is feasible. By doing so, that helps shorten the crossing distance for pedestrians 8 to 10 feet on each side of Woodward, which we think is pretty substantial for the near term. Adding a bike lane on each side of Woodward, which hasn't been done on Woodward previously, obviously. So that sort of provides another avenue of transportation or option for transportation. Safer intersections with more visibility, and that really means for everyone. And we'll show some examples of that. And then potential for spot improvements for trees and green stormwater infrastructure. We're hoping that maybe we can fit in some of that now and show that it will work and there's a benefit to that. The long term, like I said, if there were a reconstruction, we've heard in the past, expanded sidewalks, other streetscape amenities, more lighting, more benches, more crosswalks to sort of provide more options rather than having just people go to those further crosswalks. Raised bike lanes, more stormwater infrastructure, transit, autonomous vehicles. Really, there's been so much that's been changing in transportation lately that, who knows, there could be many other things we're thinking about at that point. So this is pulled right from the bicycling and pedestrian safety audit and where we're looking at specifically on certain intersections, but generally this is the idea. And though this is an MDOT project and primarily focused on new asphalt, we looked at the short-term option and it seems feasible based on the studies. So like I said, reduction of a travel lane, north and south, shorter pedestrian crossings, that can all be achieved by removing the travel lane. So effectively, the short-term modification would bump out existing parking into that former travel lane. And we'll get into that a little bit more on the next slide. So, there are different contexts and different sections of Woodward. And like I said, that's what we're looking at. But this interim concept, at the top, there is sort of a cross-section view if you're standing on Woodward. In the middle, this is generally what you would see. And then there's an overhead view here as well. But you can see sort of mirrored on both sides of Woodward how there's more space that we feel dedicated to people. This concept would maintain the existing curb and gutter shortening that crossing distance that would provide some safe and less pressure to travel both sides of Woodward. The interim bike lane would bend around these existing curb extensions like you see here. And the two-way bike lane provides more comfortable intuitive access to businesses, visiting businesses on Woodward, shifting that traffic off of the sidewalk, making it more clear that sidewalk is for pedestrians. And then by narrowing the street in general, the road diet promotes safer speeds. And there's some areas where we think it's a little bit easier for drivers to merge as well, less confusing. So these are just examples of some interim implementation options. So there's paint, there's bollards, parking protection. Some other communities have used sort of like parking block type execution. So, we're looking for more of that short-term improvement now, because we would not be touching drainage, which has kind of been relayed to us that increases the cost quite a bit. This is kind of about everyone who uses Woodward Transit, drivers, pedestrians, and people who ride bikes. So this is probably a familiar condition for people trying to remedy this issue of sight lines for drivers and pedestrians. So right now, this is an example on West Lewiston where Woodward is on an angle and buildings are very close to the sidewalk. So drivers typically, they stop behind this crosswalk, kind of encroach into the crosswalk a bit because they can't see. So it has caused some of the collisions we've seen over time. The new condition, which we'll show better on the next slide, shows the crosswalk moved farther back and drivers would stop behind the crosswalk and have a more unobstructed view. There are some areas where we would probably have to remove like the immediate corner parking space, but I think those have been problematic over the years as well. So this is an overhead view of probably more of a long-term concept. There's probably more concrete in this drawing than would be completed in the short term, but we think can be accomplished in a similar fashion with paint and other materials. So generally the cars would stop before the crosswalk, providing this gap, and then which allows for bikes, pedestrians, anyone using the sidewalk to cross without conflict, potentially. And then it's sort of the drivers would wait here as well. So the car based on the angle is already pointed in a way that has a better, more unobstructed view. So anything that would be here would need to be, this is just an example of green stormwater infrastructure, but would be lower to the ground. There wouldn't be that same as construction people are seeing now. This also helps shorten the crossing distance for people crossing over this crosswalk. The bike lane is roughly 8 feet, and so that allows more space, obviously, than there is right now, and it's also compatible with a long-term reconstruction if that were to happen by NDOT in the future. So this is a side street intersection example. Other side streets that have traffic lights, like 9 Mile, Camborne, Marshall, this could be a similar example. Again, this is more long-term with the concrete that you can accomplish in other ways. Many of the intersections that are signalized that have traffic signals already have no turn on red signage, which helps keep crosswalks clear for pedestrians. And so we think that this helps make everyone really a bit more visible here. And if there were enforcement from people, you turning on a red and stuff like that, on a red signal and stuff like that, that's something we'd have to look for as well. But again, safety as a safety improvement, we think this is better for all, for visibility. We're still thinking about transit. Obviously, it's a very busy corridor for smart bus. So we're thinking about how do people get to and from the bus. And so these changes could also include a raised bus island or something a little bit more protected. You could add some green stormwater infrastructure. You could have a shelter here. We're working with Smart Bus. They're very interested in helping designing some of these key bus stops so that people can safely visit Ferndale to get to work and play and all those sorts of things. these are just examples of how other cities have done that. Some of these obviously are a little more high end, but we think that there's some things we can do in the short term that provide this separation, make it a little easier for folks to get on the bus. And so SMART has been pretty eager to help with that, which we appreciate. I've talked about the long term a bit, and as I said, that's long term is something where there'd be a full on reconstruction. This is just one example that was from the safety audit of what could be planned for in the long term. But as I said before, expanded sidewalks and more crosswalks, stormwater infrastructure, transit. These are all things that we've heard over and over from various studies that we think when the time comes to really tear up Woodward and do a reconstruct, these are things we could include. And then this is just a similar view with the cross-section view where you can see there's some expanded sidewalk, which would be important, some more permanent green stormwater infrastructure that could be something we look at in the future. And then these are examples, areas where, like Minneapolis, where there's sort of shared use paths, new trees, stormwater infrastructure, lighting. You can see how that can add up quickly, and that's something I think that could be planned in the long term. So we wanted to set up enough time for question and answers. So really focused on the short-term design options. So Aaron, this is at the point where I turn over you to the Q&A, or you may already have some questions in there, it looks like.
Yeah, we do have several questions, which I think that we may or may not be able to answer now, but I can start kind of going through those. And then if other folks think of anything along the way, we can also utilize the raise your hand feature. If you're calling in, we do have 2 call-in numbers to raise your hand via the phone. You just dial *9, and we can take your questions over the phone that way as well. So the first question I have is regarding some like lights and timing. Can you talk a little bit, Justin, maybe about timing for crossing, how certain designs would impact that and allow for like a smoother crossing and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so that's really what we've been talking a lot about MDOT with is, not only do we want the extra space to make those crossings safer, but signal timing has to go along with that. And so we aren't to that stage yet, but that's conversations that are being had. And so our goal is to, hold MDOT to the standards that they have in their guidance as well. So that's sort of like in that next design type phase of where we would get into the nitty gritty of what is the exact pedestrian timing in those sorts of figures.
We've had a few questions about whether MDOT has approved this or quote unquote, like allowed this to happen. I think that the root of that is really looking for maybe talking about the checklist that we had to go through or, kind of what the next steps would be if this were to move forward in Ferndale.
Sure. So any community that is looking to change the streetscape on a MDOT public right-of-way, they go through MDOT's road diet checklist, which has a number of factors from everything from are you a national security emergency route to do you have a complete streets ordinance, do you have a transportation plan, and so that checklist is not complete yet. So we're working our way through that. So part of that was the traffic study. Part of one of the checkpoints was that traffic study. And so in the end, City Council will evaluate if we move forward, and they would, part of the checklist is a resolution of support for this project. And so we aren't to that stage yet. The goal would be for us to present this to City Council in February and hopefully get that support from council and the community. But we're not to that stage yet. But it's a long checklist and we've been kind of working our way through that so far.
All right, let's see. There's been a few questions about doing anything in the median and what that would look like for mass transit along Woodward.
Yeah. So MDOT's project is really within the existing curb with the existing curb. And so the median is not really part of this project. That has still been, the median has still been the back of our minds for folks that are familiar or maybe aren't with the regional transit proposal from 2016. That plan did propose bus rapid transit within the median from Pontiac to Detroit, in a little bit different scenarios for each of those communities. But the Ferndale portion was within the median. The mayor might be able to provide some more detail, but the median's not part of this particular project. I think there's been, past suggestions about, putting a walking path or a shared use path or bike lane in the median, and the safety concerns with the Michigan lefts have always, kind of held that up. So that's not in the immediate plans, if those were the questions.
One of the questions that we had was regarding traffic along some of the cross streets. So have we taken into account the increased traffic on streets like Helton, Pinecrest, Livernois by drivers avoiding this area for any improvements?
It's something that's been top of mind. We haven't done an official traffic study for all those streets. I think that certainly Hilton would probably be one, just being that it would probably see some increases, but we haven't done that type of modeling or anything like that yet. I think, fortunately, on streets like Livernois, where there's been some complete streets modifications already made, I think that, as we've heard throughout the Ferndale Moves plan, some folks have talked about, what will Hilton look like in the future? Are there safety improvements that can be made? And so I think that would, be part of future planning conversation too. So we're thinking about it, but there's not been specific traffic modeling for those streets.
One of the questions that I think is worthwhile to kind of talk a little bit about too, even though we don't necessarily know what could happen, is what are the challenges that might impact the feasibility of the long-term designs?
That's a great question. I think in one of the previous meetings, someone had asked, related to that, are we planning this with regional transit in mind, and is SEMCOG involved and stuff like that, and they have been, and they've weighed in as well. But I think the long-term challenges, a lot of those are, I think when it comes to curb and drainage, that is really in concrete. That's where the primary expense comes into play. So I think really staff would have to do a deep dive into what that is, what that increase in cost would be, because I think that we would have to plan much further out to budget for that sort of project, and seek a lot more grants, certainly. I think that's been the primary challenge with that, is really just curb, gutter, drainage, sidewalks.
This one is in the original survey, which I'm not sure if it means maybe the business survey or previous surveys that we've had in the community, but one option was keeping parking where it is and the bike lanes being on the other side, or the road side of the parking. Is this still an option? And there's a comment saying it's currently dangerous to pull out into the road at the angle with the parking, and they foresee this as staying the same with that shown example that we had earlier.
Sure. I think that one thing we've already been looking at is a better way to visualize that, but I haven't seen a recent example, I think, of keeping, or, I just think that the viability of having a bike lane that's unprotected is probably not going to be supported or feel safe really for folks on Woodward. I think that just not as many people would use it, to be honest. But I would say that it really will be up to city council, I think, of, if that's something that they would want staff to look into more. But I think that right now, this is what we would recommend over that option. And I think that you would still be able to keep the majority of the parking in this scenario. There just may be some parking at corners, which I think that, if you ask probably some other departments as well, they'd probably want to see go away just because of the visibility, no matter what the layout is.
This one is regarding cost of and finances. What is the dollar amount going to cost the city, and will maintenance come from city taxes? This might be a Justin Mayor tag team.
So I could start, I guess. So at this point, we're still costing out what it would be. I think, we wanted to get into specific intersection by intersection design, and we can't, not full design, but I think to cost out, I think you need to do a little bit more work on that. So that's what we're doing right now. I think that we're seeking every grant we possibly can to fund the construction. Any grant that we apply for usually asks for maintenance. And right now, the city is reimbursed for maintenance on Woodward by MDOT. And so that's the conversation that we're going to continue to have about maintenance. But that's sort of how high level, how the arrangement works with MDOT.
Yeah, and I'll just say that as through this process, we're getting a lot of what does this cost? Well, we're still narrowing our options, and then once we nail in the options, the team will start costing them out with the design engineering, because that's going to be part of the council approval process of moving forward. And we're also looking at how to maintenance the changes going forward, not just paying for the project, but also what are the maintenance costs going forward, as we do on every street. But usually the city gets two types of revenues, well, three types of revenues to pay for our streets. One is through direct property tax that goes to street maintenance. There's also Act 51 dollars, which flows through the state to help cities pay for street repairs and maintenance. And then there's the grant opportunities, which is more of the upfront pay for the project, not for long-term maintenance. And MDOT over the years, because our state has such a funding problem of paying for transportation, of upkeeping our roads, bridges, and infrastructure, MDOT has put a lot of onus on the communities to maintain the infrastructure that they own. And they have these agreements between the city and MDOT, which is why the city of Ferndale takes care of the medians, and not only on 8 Mile, but also on Woodward. So stay tuned. All of these funding questions are probably going to coalesce at the end. I would say around April, May, and June is when you'll start seeing more information about that.
Thank you. Here's a question about, will this redesign work with Detroit to help improve mobility over 8 Mile?
Ideally, yes. So we have good conversations. Like, obviously, this is a project with Pleasant Ridge, but we plan and partner with Detroit whenever we can. So my understanding is that their portion of Woodward is not part of the 2022 plans, but would be in the future. So just like with Livernois, we have been sharing general ideas and would continue to plan with them. And sorry, there was one more thing related to that. And the city of Detroit's also working on their long-term mobility plan as well, just like we're working on Ferndale Moves. So I would expect Woodward would be a big part of their planning as well.
This one is a comment and then a question. The 15-year risk of not seeing this happen from MDOT is terrifying. Is there something Ferndale residents can do to make sure this can succeed with such a short planning window?
Yeah, I think, continuing to share feedback with staff. So you'll have our emails at the end of this presentation. We're also in the middle of updating the Ferndale Moves plan. And so we've already got a lot of feedback on Woodward, but I think just continuing to do that is helpful. And I think it never hurts to contact MDOT and say that, you know, you would like, that there are concerns about the long-term of Woodward. And I know that they're working through a lot of funding scenarios of, you know, when all of their project schedule, I think, is shifted quite a bit just because of the past year's issues. But I think that, you know, if you regularly contact MDOT or would like to, I think that is perfectly okay. They had offered to be at future meetings as well to collect feedback. So we're sharing feedback with them. That is a key part of their road die checklist is getting feedback from the community. So I think, Mayor, maybe you might have a more eloquent answer than that. But
you know, I am optimistic that MDOT is going to support this. They've been saying for years that they support context-sensitive design. When I was the president of the Michigan Municipal League and had a presentation from the director, Ajibab, the new MDOT director, after the Governor Whitmer was seated in her role, I invited him here to Ferndale with Pleasant Ridge. And so he heard firsthand our needs and wants and concerns around Ferndale. And so I'm optimistic at the upper level of leadership, they support this, but really it's the engineers that get the approvals of working with staff. And I know staff are negotiating on our best interests on behalf of all of you and the city. But I do think it would be helpful if residents, if we provided an email, Jordan or Justin, for residents and a name for people to send their comments and express support, I think that I would be most favorable and welcome of those comments to go to them.
we will figure out who the best person for that is.
Okay.
Great idea. Mm-hmm.
All right, looks like we just have a few more so far. So if you have other questions, if you have other comments, again, you can use the raise your hand feature. We do have 2 call-in numbers. If you are a call-in, you can use *9 to raise your hand, and we can go from there. So the next question is, can a commitment to single surface sidewalks be made to prevent future situations that impede accessibility and increase maintenance costs, such as eroding brick or faux brick or anything like that?
I think, you know, I think that's a great idea. I think that also, I think, you know, the city has seen over the years, you know, some of the brick and things like that on Woodward, we probably wouldn't do again. So you know, I'd love to talk more about that and hear recommendations about that. But yeah, I think accessibility through our Accessibility and Inclusion Commission, I think that's exactly what they're hoping to, you know, push the city to do. And, you know, I think you have staff's support in that as well.
And may I add to that? You know, these sidewalks were redone about 20 years ago now, and we've been patching and repairing as we go, and they definitely have shown their age. We now know what works and what doesn't work with the brick. I don't think anybody on staff or anybody on council was on council at the time that these decisions were made. So we do have an opportunity to rethink with modern day new materials and ways of designing this that best fits the needs of the community and our accessibility and inclusive goals.
All right, we have a few more questions, and I was just notified that our chat is disabled, so I apologize for that, everyone. I didn't know. I'm working on it on the back end. If you do have questions, please type them into the Q&A section or raise your hand, and I'm working on getting that chat enabled. All right, so the next question is, wouldn't getting on to mass transit, to a mass transit vehicle be safer from the curb rather than the median? So some comments on that regarding mass transit in the median versus on the side.
I don't have all of the information on the Regional Transit Authority's plan, what that was, but I do believe that it came with a lot of bus stop type improvements that would have happened in the median at each of the, I guess, mile streets. So I know that there's a lot of background research that was done with that. I know other communities prefer often the middle setup because it does reduce the number of conflicts. But I think you do have to make, if you're doing this type of design, you do have to pair it with safe pedestrian crossings too. So, you know, that's something that we could look into and follow up and talk to the Regional Transit Authority about.
Can I add a little bit more context too? You know, there's been a lot of studies, the Woodward Alternative Analysis in 2014, which had concepts that was leading into the 2016 ballot initiative. But I think we're going to have to go back to the drawing board and work with the community on whatever is passed as part of a new transit initiative, which I believe is going to happen in 2022 on the ballot. However, it's incongruent with the timing of the repaving. It's happening after the repaving project is completed. And so we have to take advantage of what's in front of Ferndale now and then work with the Regional Transit Authority on what is passed as part of that regional transit plan for Ferndale. And I believe that the RTA will be having a lot of engagement process around any transit enhancements for Woodward and the region. That's something that is going to be a little bit out of Ferndale's hands as the leader of that. That's going to be the RTA, where the community will participate, including myself.
Great. So there was a question about who is this going to serve? How many cyclists do we actually have in Ferndale? Who is this serving, and talk a little bit about like what that means for the city.
Sure. You know, I think anytime we think about planning a street in Ferndale, we go back to our complete streets ordinance that plans for all users of ages and abilities. And so I really think this serves everyone because it has drivers and people in cars in mind. It has people on bikes in mind. It has people walking and rolling. It has transit riders in mind. So it's really more of a democratization of the street and thinking about everyone that could possibly use it. And you know, going back to that stat of 6% of sidewalk space, you know, this increases the space for people, shortens the crosswalks, which has been just a constant, you know, problem and really safety hazard over the years. So I think that this does help serve everyone and really, you know, it doesn't, I don't think levels the playing field because you'll still have so much area dedicated to people in cars, which we know is, you know, it's a regional corridor. So, but I think it connects Ferndale with its neighbors a bit better. I think it benefits people visiting, working, and living in Ferndale.
Okay, there's another finance question. This one's more specific to, since the cost of maintenance will come from taxes, would the city need to vote on a tax increase at any point?
Not to my knowledge for maintenance for this type of project. DPW already does maintain Woodward, and so they do have vehicles that can plow and maintain bike lanes as they've done in the past. So that's not something that I have heard is in the cards of a tax increase for maintenance for road projects.
Just, you know, I'm not interested in raising taxes to pay for this project. And so we're going to try to figure out what we can get done within our financial feasibility.
All right, it looks like we have one raised hand. So I'm going to allow them right now. And it is Augusto Mike Flores.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, good. First of all, good evening. Augusto Mike Flores on Whittington Street. Thank you so much, Mayor, and the rest of the city staff for this presentation. I have two questions, I guess more data questions. It seems that a lot of the features that you shared for short-term and long-term have been implemented on the Detroit side on Livernois. And I'm wondering if I know that we have a very close relationship with the city of Detroit. I know that the mayor has a very close relationship with a representative of that area, the city official of that area. And in terms of some of the improvements that they have seen pre-Livernois construction and post-Livernois construction, as kind of giving us an idea of what maybe potentially what the impact could potentially be on Woodward. And the second question, again, related to kind of cost and taxes and so forth. I know that the numbers have not been firmed up, but it seems like a lot of this project is aligning with a lot of other things that are either expiring with the city. So I'm mostly thinking about the Hidley override, which is going to expire, I believe, around that same time frame of 2023, 2024. So what is the potential impact of that override if it does not get revoted in by the residents in terms of impact to this project, the maintenance, the long-term maintenance of this project, and so forth. So hopefully that was clear. If not, I can further elaborate.
Well, I'll take this. There's a lot of questions in there and overlapping issues, but let me start with what I heard on Livernois. We can get you the cost of Livernois, but that was the third project to redo Livernois, and I think in an 8-9 period, because the city of Detroit spent money to redo the median, and it didn't work. And the final one was this current concept. And all I have is feedback that I heard from officials over and that represent that area and staff, is that the businesses really like the wider sidewalks because they can put more of their product out on the sidewalk for their customers to see. They slow down the traffic because a lot of that area was traffic was speeding through and people weren't taking time to visit. They have clearer parking areas there now, which what the businesses wanted. And from personal experience as a cyclist who used to ride Livernois all the time, it is much safer for people walking and biking and traversing, particularly on getting to the university down there. So so to that end, but we can get you the cost, and I know their cost was much more than ours because they did the deep gut of the street. They just didn't do a mill and resurface, which is planned for Woodward. They went down to the dirt and really redid all the sidewalks from the building to the curb. And that is not planned for the short term. We don't have money to do that. That takes longer planning than we have. For the Headley is more of a citywide, funding challenge that all cities face, not just Ferndale. Most cities didn't provide a sunset in their Headley override because it's a statewide functional problem that impacts cities. So if it doesn't pass, we're going to have another multi-million-dollar shortfall that will have to be made up somehow, and either we cut services or drastically, and the community will have to decide what it values more. We keep the Headley and renew it at the current capacity that we have, and maintain services. How that will impact this project, it's going to be after this project. Again, we're trying to pay for the Woodward improvements through grants. The city will be contributing some money, but I don't see the need to raise any taxes to pay for this project. I'm not interested in doing that, but I would have to take the pulse of council, but I suspect they aren't interested in doing that either, but I cannot speak on behalf of them. I don't know if that's answered all of that. Did I get all of your questions answered?
Yeah, no, you
okay. Yeah,
you did. And I completely agree with you. I think that the Livernois project on the Detroit side is an awesome project. In fact, I think that if the city does move, like in terms of long-term, I think that's what would mostly benefit the businesses and the pedestrians on the city. However, as we all are, we're concerned with the cost. But I think that on the Detroit side, they executed that awesomely. I went to U of D. I have friends who live in the district. I bike, we walk, and we know the owners of Good Cakes and Bakes. And everything that you shared is true. And I've experienced it myself. It's just the financials and how we're going to be able to support that from a community perspective.
Yeah, I prefer to have more time to figure that out, but we've already pushed MDOF 1 year of repaving, and because we had construction fatigue with the DOT and I-75, and I'm so grateful we did. I can't imagine Woodward been under construction during our pandemic 2020, and the stress, the more stress that would have put on our businesses. So I feel like we dodged a big bullet off of that one. But now we can't push it off anymore. And so we're really in this really hard spot of meeting their deadlines and getting what we can get done to solve some of these community and resident business concerns with the funds that we have, living within our means, and then looking longer term. I wish we could widen the sidewalks as part of this project, but it is not doable. And I'm really disappointed about that. But we can set ourselves, the community, up for success for when the major restructured repair comes to the next council, maybe a decade from now. And who knows how a transit investment might, at the regional level, might impact this. I have no idea how that will interplay with Woodward needs.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay. So we doesn't look like we have anyone with their hands raised. Again, if you're calling in and if you would like to participate, you can do a *9, and that indicates that you would like to speak. It doesn't look like we have any further questions. There was a question about whether or not mass transit would be back on the ballot. I think that that's something that we addressed a little bit earlier in saying that we're not, we don't know exactly what will be brought forth, but there has been talks about what mass transit would look like in this region. And so that's something to just kind of keep an eye on for the future. But otherwise, I haven't seen anything else in. And if for some reason you think I missed your question, we had a lot of them come in, so please either type that in the chat, type it in the Q&A, raise your hand. We're here to help answer any questions you have. And it looks like we have another hand raise, and Augusto Mike Flores, again, would like to speak.
Yeah, this is just more kind of a philosophical question from the mayor and the staff. I know that all of you are all dedicated to kind of regionalism and working with our partners. Can you speak a little bit more about, if we're able to realize this project, how does it get integrated with the Detroit side and potentially the Royal Oak side? And the reason I'm asking that is because, again, I speak highly of the Livernois project on the Detroit side, and I see our side, and it almost seems disconnected. I know that we speak about it connecting, but when you look at the execution, it's different. Obviously, because of the dollars. But in terms of Woodward, in terms of like, what's the strategy at the state level? Or do we have visibility to that in terms of what they want to do as we kind of connect this major corridor in our region? Because I think if we are able to execute it correctly, it's almost going to look disjointed, very similar to Livernois, where sections of Woodward look great and other sections of Woodward just don't look great. I don't know if you're able to speak that, or what your philosophy or vision is on that, or if you have any visibility at the state level on that.
Do you mind if I take this, Justin? You ask a really great question, and I'm going to start first with the attempt of the Woodward alternative analysis. So that was a grant that was $2.5 million, and the 5 cities, Ferndale to Birmingham, applied for that grant and was awarded it. And it went through SEMCOG because they had to manage it. A state agency that can manage state, federal, or federal transit funds has to manage the project. And they asked us to open it up from Detroit to Pontiac. Given the politics of the day, Ferndale and Birmingham and the cities in between went in all of that because the county was not pursuing that on behalf of the Woodward community. So we went off on our own to do it. Unfortunately, the transit ballot initiative sort of died, and the steam of building and working along Woodward, all the communities, I would say, because that project went into political slumber, so the city sort of did that as well. However, I have been pushing the county to develop a Woodward strategy, an economic development strategy that focuses on housing, design of the corridor, and helping be a stronger partner, pulling together the cities. The Woodward Avenue Action Association, which has been brought up in the chat here by Ms. Evelyn Elster, is a nonprofit, and unfortunately, they're really struggling to serve the communities. And I think that model needs to be reassessed, which I'm working with city staff on. And so I think we're at a different point than we were with Coulter, our executive Coulter at the helm. And there's new emerging opportunities, I think, that need to be considered going forward. So I guess I'm waxing philosophical to your philosophical question. But this is, I am always looking for what are the opportunities that are emerging? What are the differences under the Patterson executive leadership versus the Coulter executive leadership? What is changing, and what is the RTA going to be doing? And unfortunately, MDOT is not repaving all of Woodward between Ferndale and Birmingham and Pontiac. They aren't. So we have to take advantage of what's in front of us, in my opinion, and see what we can do now to solve resident and business challenges with Woodward. And then, like I said, if we miss this opportunity to land the space shuttle during the NASA window, then we go back up to orbit, and that orbit is, who knows when that will happen. It could be 10 years, maybe it could be 2 or 3 after the transit millage. I don't know. I can't predict the future in that political machinations of transit higher above, the mayor level.
Okay. So there is no kind of master strategy currently, that like we're not working towards a master regional strategy currently. Okay.
The RTA will be. The RTA will be, and they need to update the regional master transit plan to go out for a 2022 millage. And I suspect they're going to launch that this year.
Okay.
The regional master transit plan, which Ferndale, and I suspect all the communities will participate. Ferndale has been, and the corridor has been studied heavily through the RTA. They did a multimodal study last year that staff were a part of. So I think this is an ongoing process that Ferndale will always be a voice and participating in as the project goes forward. And no, we're not spending the interregion's entire money. The region has to vote for a ballot initiative, and Ferndale's will be contributing to that pot of money, and how that is spent will be to benefit the people who need to get to work and where they need to go by improving transit and connecting our region better together.
Yep. Thank you, Mayor. I agree with you. I think that this vision that we have for Woodward can't just be Ferndale's. It has to be, if the state can't do it for us, using the county to help execute this, I think is, what I'm, I hear it from you. And it seems that that's where we may be going. So I'm full support of county helping us execute this vision for a successful Woodward corridor in Oakland County and Wayne.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Mayor.
Yep.
All right. So it doesn't look like we have any other questions coming in right now. Again, you can use the raise your hand feature that's located at the bottom of the screen, or through the panelists section. If you are a call-in, you can do *9. And okay, there's a question that just came in about which it looks like, Justin, you were going to talk about next steps, and that was one of the questions, the next steps.
Okay. Yeah, so just going back to the overall timeline, I guess, this is a lot of history condensed in one area, but let's just focus on this end of the timeline. So we're sort of here in this January timeframe of getting more feedback and engagement. So really, right now, what staff is doing is we're trying to get those high level estimates, so we can share those with the community and council of what this short-term design would look like. And we're aiming for a city count the second meeting in February to request for city council to consider that we apply for this grant. It's called a TAP grant. It's a Transportation Alternatives Program grant, which is specifically for this type of project where you're trying to increase pedestrian space and make safety improvements for people on bikes and that sort of thing. And so the city's been awarded those grants for other projects in the past, but so we are going to request from city council that we apply for that. Hopefully we would get awarded that grant. We would find out sometime in the summertime about that. So, we would be hopefully working towards some design documents, further like engineering specific documents that we would hand to MDOT in August. And then they would work that into their project. We'd have probably a fall community meeting where we would talk, more about, here's what this project would look like, and then talk about construction timeline, which at this stage, the resurfacing sounds like it would be April to November of 2022. But yeah, so right now we're working on the high level design so we can come up with a cost, so we can make everyone a bit more informed and see what the reality is, even with the short-term opportunity.
All right. No further questions at this time. Like I said, we still have a little bit of time left. On the screen right now, we have a few different email addresses that you can reach us at. Both Justin Lyons and myself, Erin Quattel, we have our email addresses as well as a general one that goes to our Ferndale Moves. That one will be just collected for our Ferndale Moves project, as well as any other mobility related items. And we can still hang around. Feel free to raise your hand if you want to make any other comments. Looks like we still have another call in. So you can use *9 to raise your hands. But otherwise, that's what we have for this evening.
And we do have a specific project page on ferndalemoves.com. At the top of the page, there's a recent projects button, and that's where we're putting all the Woodward specific information. So you'll see probably a few frequently asked questions there right now. We can incorporate the questions asked tonight in case others in the community have those. And there's some of the past studies are on that page as well. And hopefully, if you visit that page in the next month, you'll see the updated draft Ferndale Moves overall citywide plan, not just Woodward, but for the citywide as well. So.
Great. Well, like I said, we are happy to stick around, but that's all we have for this evening. So if there's no further questions, feel free to hop off. This will be available, as we mentioned before, will be recorded and available after the fact. So if any of your friends or colleagues missed this, feel free to share that. And with that, we can probably wrap up, team.
Great. Thanks everyone who participated. Even if you didn't ask a question, we had tons of good questions tonight. And as Erin said, we can be reached at all of these different collective email addresses. And so really appreciate the time on a snowy Wednesday night.